I noticed from your website that you've been working a lot last several weeks on a project calling for the freedom of a correspondent to your program, to Rising Up with Sonali, Dortell Williams. So, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was the subject of my weekly newsletter, and it followed from the fact that I was invited to join the committee to free Dortell Williams. He is somebody that I've known for more than 20 years. And in fact, I brought to do a little show and tell for you and your audience, Richard. I brought a photograph of Dortell. Um, and let me back up a little bit. He's someone that I've known because when I was a community radio host at KPFK Pacifica Radio, starting in the early 2000s, I used to get lots and lots of letters, actual handwritten letters, right? Because we did that back then. And I got a letter from this prison inmate from Lancaster County, Lancaster State Prison, which is in Southern California. And Dortell Williams wrote to me saying, I am a regular listener to your show. I had a lot of listeners in Lancaster, and something about his letter just stood out at me. I can't quite put my finger on it and why I decided to write back to him, but I wrote back to him. And then we just carried on a correspondence and have become good friends. And earlier on, very early on in our correspondence, he sent me a photo of his, and I want to show that to your audience. That's Dortell, and this was sent to me in the year 2005. And I'll just read it out for the
Yeah,
audience. It said,
yeah, because not everybody's got video. Yeah.
yeah, he said he wrote to Sister Sonali, a wonderful and devoted activist, community example, motivator, and so much. Thank you, Dortell. And in some ways, I sort of mentored him back then, helping him get the confidence to do interviews. I used to call him up on the phone and have him on my show and interview him. And I really feel like somewhere along the way, the tables turned, and he taught me so much about what it means to think about crime and punishment, what it means to think about cycles of trauma, what it means to really approach the world from a place of understanding people before we really jump to any conclusions about them. So then I brought him on as a special correspondent. And a few years ago, the state of California legalized a way for inmates to have video calls with the outside world. They issued tablets to all of the prisoners. And so Dortell and I can now text one another and can do video chats. And so I was able to do video interviews with him. And he has been incarcerated for 36 years. And unless the governor of California decides to commute his sentence, he will be incarcerated for the rest of his life because he has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that began when he was in his early 20s, before he could even grow a beard. He came in so young and naive. He talks about how he was very ignorant at the time and not very well educated. He came from a family where verbal abuse was commonplace. You know, his folks were low income, struggling, and so he entered the underground economy. And after he came into prison, he was sort of forced to reflect on his life. He earned a paralegal certificate, went on to earn 4 associates of arts degrees, got his doctorate in ministries. I mean, he's just done so much more than most of us would do in a single lifetime. And he's just really worked very hard and created this community of a network of people around him. Many of the people he's mentored have had their sentences commuted, have been freed. For example, James King, who is on the committee to free Dortell Williams, now works at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights.
Mm.
Dortell mentored him at Lancaster. And Governor Newsom has commuted many, many sentences over the course of his tenure, especially people who have been in for life without parole. And we think that it's past due that Dortell comes home because he doesn't even get to go before a parole board. When you're sentenced, it's called LWOP, LWOP, life without parole. When you're an LWOP, you never, ever get the opportunity to go before a parole board and say, hey, here's why I should be freed. I've done all of these things to work on myself. I'm showing remorse, etc. All of the things that the system requires you to do to show you've been rehabilitated, quote unquote. LWOPs don't even get that opportunity. They're just written off as completely, irredeemable. And society has locked them up and thrown away the key. And I think Newsom recognizing that, and Californians recognizing that we were far too eager to do that to people in the early 90s, has started to free people. And we really, Dortell's going to be 60 next year. His mother is past 80. He lost his father while he was in prison. He's lost his aunt. And his mom is desperately, worried that she won't get to be reunited with her son before she passes. So it's time.
And the early 90s, of course, were an infamous time for this country's political culture of incarceration. Right? I mean, you had the myths about super predators, and you had this sort of bipartisan railroading of the idea that some people were just irredeemable. And I would say not only the Republicans, but the Bill Clinton led wing of the Democratic Party were very much a part of it. Sonali, I want to take a brief diversion before we get into the campaign to free Dortell Williams, because I think it's going to come up in some people's minds. You've created a website. I can't remember, is the URL freedortellwilliams.com?
Yes.
And of course, you write about it yourself. And people may be listening, or people may want to help, but they may go to the website. There will be people out there who say, well, geez, what did he do? And that information is not present in this material. And I've noticed that as well. You wrote a book on prison abolition, and I've noticed that as well in other prison abolition literature. And I don't want to have my progressive card pulled just for asking the question, but I think people will wonder, and I'm not asking about Dortell, but I'm asking if you can tell us a little bit why abolition advocates usually don't mention the conviction of the person when they're talking about an individual who's incarcerated.
Yeah, in many ways, it's a rejection of the so-called politics of respectability, because abolitionists, and I don't want to, by the way, label Dortell Williams as an abolitionist. He should speak for himself. I am an abolitionist, and I think a lot of the people, probably almost all the people on the committee, might identify themselves as abolitionists, or might not, but they know Dortell personally and think he should be freed. But the culture and the standard of values within abolitionism today is that the people who have been caught in the system of mass incarceration and the so-called criminal justice system are victims of a system that should not have to prove that they are the perfect victims in order to, quote unquote, deserve freedom. That we live in a country that has such an illegitimate claim to locking people up and throwing away the key, imprisoning them unfairly, unjustly, creating situations in society where poor people, by virtue of being poor, and generally disproportionately people of color, get caught in a system that has completely dehumanized them. And in order to be seen as human, they shouldn't have to prove themselves. They are human. And so just in the same way that we reject, for example, Palestinians having to prove that they're the perfect victim in order to deserve to survive a genocide, in that same way, prison abolitionists want to make it very clear that the crime, the so-called conviction, et cetera, is irrelevant. In many cases, people are convicted for things they didn't do. But if they talk about what they might or might not have done, and they're still in prison, that can be held against them as they apply for parole. In many cases, there are people who were convicted because the jury was biased, who were convicted on a technicality.
And of course, you have people who are, I'm sorry to interrupt, Sonali, but you have people who are in prison because they were told in no uncertain terms, despite the fact that they were innocent, they were protesting that they were innocent. If you try to win this and lose, you will do 40 years. If you plead guilty,
bargains, exactly.
Yeah, you can get out in 15. So there are innocent people who have pleaded guilty. And it strikes me this is such an important point to ponder for every incarcerated person, because first of all, if we say, well, he or she is a convict or they are a convict, right? If we say they are a convicted X, we've already surrendered to the state the right to label a human being in all their complexity as one dimension that may not even be true. And then, of course, there's the injustice of the justice system. I mean, I'm in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. If I'd come from a different neighborhood, they might have stuck one of those. They would have, as a matter of fact. I won't go into details, but so it reflects so many social inequalities and that kind of thing. And so, for some people, it may feel strange at first, but I think it's a way for people to get comfortable with this is a human being, and you can't know every dimension of someone's story, especially in prison.
Yeah, I mean, and for someone like Dortell, it doesn't matter what he did when he was in his early 20s. I challenge anybody who was in their early 20s to think of things that that they wish nobody knew, that they've done. And it's true that some crimes are so much worse than others. But I also want to make clear that the Dortell of today is very different than the Dortell of the 1990s. And both were people who were completely stripped of the ability to have a full life. So even when he was free, and there are so many like him, it's not just him, it's so many like him. There are countless Dortells in our prisons today. So, and it's so important for us to think about the fact that we are spending our tax dollars on keeping this person locked up. For what good reason? For what good reason would we keep somebody who has so much life to live? He is locked up at our expense, and there are people who are destroying this country who walk free, right?
Right.
And I think it's really, really important for us to think about.
It reminds me of a great observation that the wonderful journalist Jessica Mitford made back in the 1970s, which is she said at that time it cost roughly the same to incarcerate a person in a federal penitentiary as it did to send them to Harvard. She said, which raises the possibility of an exchange program between the two institutions, which I thought was great. But getting back to Dortell, so what is it precisely that is being asked that Governor Newsom should look at this case and this person who's been incarcerated? First of all, the idea of life without parole is contrary to the premise of the prison system, right? I mean, the penitentiary
rehabilitate,
yeah, you're supposed to be penitent and get to rehabilitate. It's saying no, you're worthless. You'll never be rehabilitated. So, is the ask that Governor Newsom pardon him and set him free?
Yeah, it's called technically a commutation. And we have very clear, easy to follow instructions on the website. This has been my passion project for the past several weeks. On the side, I do things like building websites for campaigns that I enjoy. And so I built this website in community with the campaign and the members of the committee. And if you go to freedortellwilliams.com/take action, or just go to freedortellwilliams.com and click on take action. There's two very simple things. First, you write to the governor. There's instructions because there's no email address. You have to go to the website. It's a comment, but then you got to pick the thing from the drop down menu. And then we've got a very easy copy and paste. Here's a paragraph of who he is, and there's a number attached to every inmate. Yes, it's so dehumanizing. They're identified by their numbers, and you basically say that you want him to be reunited with his mother. Please commute him. You just copy and paste that, and you hit enter. That's going to ask you for your name and email address, and I believe your address in California. And then you hit submit. So it's all described there. And then we also have a change.org petition going, which if we can get a few thousand signatures on the change.org petition, which of course takes seconds, most of us have signed those petitions. That'll make a big difference. If there's only one thing you can do today, sign the change.org petition. But if you can do both, writing to the governor is just as important, if not more important. And the whole thing should take you no more than 3 to 5 minutes. So freedortellwilliams.com/take action.
Well, one question people are going to have, a lot of us don't live or no longer live in California. What can us non-Californians do? Can we do both?
Yes.
Can we do one and not the other? Or how does this work?
You can do both. You can do both because it'll say whether you're from, when you put your address in, and it'll, it might weigh. I don't know what calculations the governor takes. Honestly, Gavin Newsom doesn't have like a quota, right? He's not limited by how many people he frees. He's not triggered to act by how many people write to him about one particular case. He could decide tomorrow to free Dortell Williams with a stroke of a pen. If he just woke up on the right side of the bed and thought, today I will do something good. Oh, look, I'm getting some emails about this one guy. Let me take a look. Boom, it's done. And so the more that people write to him, the better, whether you're in California or not. So please do write to him.
All right. So again, www.dortell, DORTELL, right? DortellWilliams.com, right?
Yeah. Yes. It's DortellWilliams.com. And if you don't mind, Richard, I'd like to share a little bit about what Dortell taught me in terms of how I think as an abolitionist.
Absolutely. Sure.
So, I kind of came at this whole thing from a rah-rah justice position. The whole system is corrupt. Tear it down. We need a world without prisons and police, etc. And Dortell is somebody who's had to face the system and figure out how to live within it for so long. And he opened my eyes to thinking about the whole scenario of how we examine crime, not just through inequality and where our funding priorities are, but also through trauma and the cycles of trauma. And so he talks a lot. We wrote an op-ed together that you can find at Yes Magazine's website and also on the Free Dortell Williams website. We've got some of his writings. He's a journalist too, by the way. He writes for the LA Progressive. He writes for, he's done so much. He writes for the Prison Journalism Project, etc. And he writes about how cycles of trauma repeat themselves, right? The adage, hurt people. And it's a little cliche, but it's there's a very strong psychological basis for the fact that people who, if you take away all of the inequalities, there's still going to be some people who who hurt others. And often that's because they themselves have been hurt. And in order to address crime from the root, if we start to address the traumas that people have been through, whether it's a trauma of inequality and living in an unequal society, whether it's a trauma of coming from an abusive household, maybe it's a trauma of having been assaulted as a child or abused as a child, whatever your trauma is, if you don't address that trauma, the likelihood of you in reenacting that on someone else is higher than if you hadn't been traumatized. And so addressing cycles of trauma, which is something that you see being done like in European communities and when it comes to why people commit crimes and when they end up in prison, if we can break those cycles of trauma, we address crimes before they happen. Police can't break cycles of trauma, but psychologists can, mental health counselors can. We as a society can put money into those things to help break those cycles of trauma. And that was really important for me, I think, to look at it from the perspective of someone who really holds victims front and center, because he's had to think so hard about, and all of the people who have been imprisoned have had to center victims of crimes, and they themselves have been victims of crimes, many and most of them, if not all of them. So he really taught me that, and it expanded my view of how to approach abolition and how to approach things like crime and punishment and prevention.
And a society that believes in forgiveness, rehabilitation, even forgiveness is the wrong word, in rehabilitation and in breaking that cycle among its members, can eventually maybe do it for the society itself. Exactly. We can come to understand why our society is as poisoned as it is, and work on healing those communal traumas too.
Exactly. I mean, I think to myself of what could Dortell's life have been if right from the start he had all the resources that did not that kind of protected him from, engaging with the underground economy or what,
Right.
could have been a professor. He could have been an artist. He could have been a journalist. He could have been anything that he wanted had he had all of the resources, had he lived in a different neighborhood, had he been born into a little more wealth, etc. Had he lived in a society that actually addressed inequality. And he's a dear friend. And I've never had the chance to even like hold his hand or look at
Yeah.
the eye without a screen. And so I want to someday. I want to be able to, and I want him to be able to be reunited with his mother. So I hope, if we live in such a dark time these days, Richard, I think about all of the things happening in this country, and for this past month I've been thinking, okay, there's this one person who's in whose life I can try to make a difference. And if I can win and help play a role in helping to win Dortell Williams's freedom, it'll vindicate 2025 just for me personally as a person, and maybe others can join me.
And taking action is addictive in a positive sense, self-reinforcing.
Exactly.
It's an action people can take. So www.dortellwilliams.com.
FreeDortellWilliams.com, please.
What free? Okay, thank you.
Williams.
www.freedortellwilliams.com. That was not a mnemonic trick on my part to make you remember. But also you can go up to zerohourreport.com. I'll have a link to it too. So as always, Sonali, thanks for your good work, and best of luck to all of us on Dortell's situation. And thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you. And if he is freed one day, we'll have to get him on the 0 hour so you can talk to him, because he is a absolutely phenomenal person to have on.
I will hope for that and look forward to it. We depend on your support here at the 0 Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.